Every NFL offseason, the teams around the league break the bank trying to lure players into town with bags of cash, hoping that they'll be the missing piece to take their team to the next level. Unfortunately, not all free agent signings are created equally, and every team has had their fair share of strikeouts. Some, of course, more so than others. But we're not here to get into who is typically best in free agency. No, quite the opposite. Today, we take a look back at every NFL team's worst free agent signing of all time. Arizona Cardinals, Emmitt Smith, RB. When you get a big name like Emmitt Smith, particularly when you're a franchise like the Arizona Cardinals, which has traditionally struggled to lure stars into town, I understand the urge to make the move. But signing the Hall of Fame running back well past his prime in 2003 was a huge mistake. He played just 25 games across 2 years, posting numbers that were well below his career averages before turning to Dallas to retire on a one-day contract. Atlanta Falcons, Kirk Cousins, QB. There isn't much that hasn't been said at this point about what a disaster the Kirk Cousins free agency signing was for Atlanta. Honestly, since its conception. 35-year-old quarterback, perennial underachiever, coming off a torn Achilles. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that's doomed from the start. And it's only gotten worse as the situation has continued to unfold. Baltimore Ravens, Earl Thomas, safety. Baltimore was ablaze with excitement when longtime Seahawks great Earl Thomas agreed to come on board in 2019. Thomas, however, proved rather quickly that his best days were well behind him, and did so with emphasis. He lasted just one season in Baltimore, had some wild off-the-field issues arise, and was ultimately caught after punching a teammate. That is quite a trifecta. Buffalo Bills, Dawan Edwards, DT. Kinda have to put the blame squarely on Buffalo for this one. Dawan Edwards came over from Baltimore as a rotational guy and was paid like a starting defensive lineman. And when they tried to make him fit the mold, well, he wilted under the increased workload. In 2 seasons, he managed just 3.5 sacks before the Bills realized that they had made a mistake and cut him loose. Carolina Panthers, Matt Khalil, OT. Carolina is far from the gold standard when it comes to free agent signings, and decisions like inking Matt Khalil to a 5-year, $55 million deal after a relatively underwhelming run with the Vikings is case in point. In his first season, he allowed one of the highest pressure rates of any tackle in the league. In year 2, he didn't play a single snap due to injury, and by year 3, the Panthers cut him outright, eating a $14 million dead cap hit just to get him out of town. Chicago Bears, Mike Glennon, QB. Leave it to the Chicago Bears to convince themselves that a guy who had started 5 games in 3 years in Tampa was worth $45 million. The final stat line for Glennon's Bears career: 4 starts, 4 losses, 5 interceptions, and 1 incredibly expensive lesson in why you don't hand out starting QB money to a backup. Cincinnati Bengals, Lavernius Coles, WR. After a bitter contract dispute, the Bengals tried to replace TJ Houshmandzadeh by giving Lavernius Cole a 4-year, $28 million deal. In return, Coles gave them 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, and one of the most forgettable seasons of all time. The Bengals quickly realized their mistake and cut him after 1 year, eating a nice cap hit in the process. Just a classic case of paying a guy for what he used to be instead of what he actually was. Or actually paying the guy they should have paid to keep him in-house. Cleveland Browns, Andre Rison, WR. This one deserves special recognition because it dates back to a time where an NFL franchise could be so cash poor that they actually needed to take out a loan to sign a big free agent, which is exactly what Cleveland did to afford Andre Rison's 5-year, $17 million contract. Cleveland finished with just 5 wins, and Rison struggled, catching less than half of his targets, and ultimately left the team at the conclusion of the season when they departed for Baltimore. Dallas Cowboys, Mike Vanderjagt, kicker. If you're gonna pay big money for a kicker, he better be automatic, and he better not be a distraction in the locker room. Unfortunately, Vanderjagt failed to check either of those boxes. Fresh off missing a crucial kick in the playoffs with Indianapolis, the Cowboys signed him to a 3-year deal, and he immediately became one of the least reliable kickers in the league. He lasted 11 games, missed 5 easy kicks, and got cut before he could even finish out the season. Denver Broncos, Kyle Fuller, CB. After signing with Denver, Fuller had the worst statistical season of his career, allowing career highs in nearly every category, and he was benched multiple times. By the time the season had ended, Denver let him walk without even considering bringing him back for a second act. Detroit Lions, Trey Flowers, DE. Matt Patricia tried to bring in a little of the Patriot way to Detroit, both with his hard-nosed coaching style and with the acquisition of Trey Flowers. But he just burned a whole lot of cap space and bridges. His first season was fine, 7 sacks, 21 QB hits, but it all fell apart rather quickly. Injuries ended up derailing Flowers' next 2 seasons, and Detroit paid him $90 million for a grand total of 10.5 sacks in 3 years. Green Bay Packers, Martellus Bennett, TE. Bennett was coming off a Super Bowl win with the Patriots and looked like a perfect fit for Green Bay's offense. The Packers gave him a 3-year, $21 million deal, hoping that he'd be their first real playmaking tight end since Jermichael Finley. But he lasted just 7 games, catching 24 passes for 233 yards and butting heads seemingly with everyone in the building. Houston Texans, Ahmad Green, RB. After a Pro Bowl career in Green Bay, Houston handed Green a 4-year, $23 million deal to be their workhorse running back. But all they got was what remained, as his body continued to deteriorate. Green played just 14 games in 2 years, rushed for a grand total of 554 yards, and never scored more than 2 touchdowns in a season, pushing the Texans to cut him before year 3, making this an expensive, injury-riddled mistake. Indianapolis Colts, Devin Funchess, WR. 1 game. That's how long Devin Funchess lasted with the Colts after signing a 1-year, $10 million deal in 2019. Funchess broke his collarbone in week 1, went on injured reserve, and never played another snap in Indianapolis. It is tough to do much worse than that. Jacksonville Jaguars, Nick Foles, QB. Just a year removed from his big Super Bowl run, Jacksonville gave Nick Foles a 4-year, $91 million contract with over $50 million guaranteed, hoping that he would at long last solve their quarterback woes, only to have him break his collarbone in his first quarter as a Jaguar. By the time that he returned, Gardner Minshew had already become a fan favorite, and Foles' play was so bad that he got benched mid-season. The Jags dumped his contract after just 4 games. And that was that. No more Foles in Jacksonville. Kansas City Chiefs, Chester McLaughlin, DT. McLaughlin was an absolute force for the Raiders. 4 straight Pro Bowls, dominant against both the run and pass. He was everything a team could want in a defensive tackle. So when Kansas City gave up a 2nd-round pick and a massive contract to sign him as a restricted free agent, Chiefs fans had a lot of hope. Unfortunately, McLaughlin never lived up to expectations, managing just 7 sacks in 3 seasons, and was ultimately cut after the 2000 season. Las Vegas Raiders, Javon Walker, WR. The Raiders have historically loved giving veteran wide receivers who may or may not be past their prime big money to wear the silver and black. But when they gave Walker a 6-year, $55 million deal, there is already some warning signs that it might not be the best idea, as his production had already started to diminish due to knee injuries. He lasted 11 games over 2 seasons, securing a measly 15 catches before the Raiders gave up and cut him. Just an absolute disaster of a contract. Los Angeles Chargers, J.C. Jackson, CB. Giving J.C. Jackson a 5-year, $82.5 million contract was one of the biggest free agent busts in recent memory. Jackson struggled out the gate, got hurt after 5 games, and never regained his form. In year 2, he was so bad that Los Angeles benched him and then traded him back to New England for basically nothing. Los Angeles Rams, Cortland Finnegan, CB. Finnegan went from a top-tier trash-talking physical corner to completely washed in just 2 years after the Rams gave him that big 5-year, $50 million contract. It was a quick and painful fall from grace for a guy that at one point was one of the most feared corners in the game. Miami Dolphins, Will Fuller, WR. If you ever need an example of why paying an injury-prone wide receiver big money is a bad idea, well, look no further than Will Fuller. The Dolphins handed him a 1-year, $10.6 million deal, and Fuller responded by playing 2 games, catching 4 passes, and then mysteriously disappearing from football forever. $2.7 million per catch. You can't make that kind of stuff up. Minnesota Vikings, Bernard Berrigan, WR. The Vikings thought that they were getting an elite deep threat when they gave Berrigan a 6-year, $42 million contract and made him one of the highest paid receivers in the league at the time. But instead, they got a guy who never had a 1,000-yard season and then completely fell off the map. By 2011, he was at the bottom of the depth chart, and Minnesota just straight up cut him mid-season, and he fell out of the league entirely. New England Patriots, Adalys Thomas, LB. Coming off a dominant run with the Ravens, Thomas was supposed to be the next great Bill Belichick chess piece. A linebacker who could play anywhere, rush the passer, and lock down tight ends. Instead, he clashed with the coaching staff, never fit into the system, and became one of the rare players to publicly complain about the Patriot way. New Orleans Saints, Jarvis Byrd, safety. The Saints were convinced that they had landed an elite safety when they handed Byrd $56 million over 6 years. But that money only got them one of the worst free agent deals in franchise history. Byrd was a playmaker in Buffalo, but the second that he arrived in New Orleans, he fell apart. Literally. A knee injury in year 1 derailed his entire tenure, and by the time he got healthy, he was nowhere near the player that they thought they signed. Tough break for Byrd, but doesn't make it any less of an egregious roster-building mistake. New York Giants, Kenny Golladay, WR. Golladay is coming off 2 solid seasons in Detroit, and the Giants, desperate for a number 1 receiver, handed him $72 million over 4 years. And what did they get? 43 catches in 2 seasons. Yeah, that is a next level of bad. New York Jets, Trumaine Johnson, CB. The Jets saw Johnson put together a couple of nice seasons in LA and decided, yeah, let's give this guy $72.5 million. Yeah, spoiler alert, that was a horrible idea. Johnson immediately became a liability in coverage and in the locker room. He was eventually benched for poor play, and by year 2, the Jets were just so sick of him that they cut him outright. Philadelphia Eagles, Byron Maxwell, CB. Philly learned the hard way that it can be challenging to evaluate individual talent when they're a part of a dominant unit, like Maxwell was with the Legion of Boom in Seattle. They gave Maxwell $63 million to be their number 1 corner, and in return, he got absolutely cooked by every receiver that he faced. The Eagles cut their losses after 1 season just to get his contract off the books. Pittsburgh Steelers, Ladarius Green, TE. Many eyebrows were raised when the Steelers gave Ladarius Green, Antonio Gates' longtime backup in San Diego, $20 million. And those eyebrows were well vindicated in short order, as Green was plagued by injuries throughout his lone season in Pittsburgh and barely contributed. San Francisco 49ers, Devondre Campbell, LB. The 49ers brought him in to be a key part of their defense, but the second Dre Greenlaw got healthy and took his job, he quit on the team and threw an adult temper tantrum. Adding him to the 49ers locker room was a massive miscalculation, both in terms of his performance and the culture fit. Seattle Seahawks, Eddie Lacy, RB. Lacy was already trending downward in Green Bay, but Seattle still gave him $5.5 million to take over their backfield, and in return, they got 179 rushing yards total. So, not exactly a surprise that the running back was out of the league entirely shortly thereafter. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Julio Jones, WR. It's always sad when a legend goes out with a whimper, and that's exactly what happened with Julio Jones in Tampa. The Bucs brought him in to help replace Rob Gronkowski, but Jones, now on his last legs, was barely a factor. He played just 10 games, caught 24 passes, and never made the impact Tampa was hoping for. Tennessee Titans, Algie Crumpler, TE. Over 2 seasons, Crumpler had just 2 touchdowns. That is a far cry from the productive stretch in Atlanta that prompted Tennessee to offer him a big deal. Insult to injury was the infamous fumble in the 2008 playoffs, when Crumpler coughed up the ball inside the 5-yard line against the Ravens, effectively ending the Titans' season. Washington Commanders, Albert Haynesworth, DT. If there's a Mount Rushmore of free agent busts, Albert Haynesworth should be front and center. Washington handed him $100 million with $41 million guaranteed, and in return, he gave them literally nothing other than the continued headache as he missed workouts, underperformed, and fought with teammates and coaches alike. What a swell guy. But hey, which free agent signings do you think was the worst in your favorite team's history? Who do you think we're right on here? Who do you think we're wrong about? Was there anyone that we may have missed? Let us know in the comment section below. If you liked this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And you know, we really appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, then subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.